This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
It's always just an unfolding flower to talk to you and to share with you the guests who come on to this show. And today, again, is a guest that I'm sure you'll all just not only appreciate, but maybe as the more I learn about Evergreen, the maybe what we have here is somebody who's going to simply blow you away with who she is in the world. We'll see. And what we're really going to explore here is what makes Evergreen. And, it's going to be like, I don't think that's the name that she grew up with. I think it's the name. Well, I don't think it was the name that she was born with. We're going to learn a little bit more about her. Let me tell you a little bit where I know Evergreen from. This is another connection from Alexandra, my wife, and both Evergreen and me have heard about each other for some time, but it wasn't until just a few weeks ago when we took a trip to Ojai to visit Sam, actually, for which Evergreen joined us, and we had a dinner, and it was just a spectacular meeting where there was just multiple sort of resonance and clicking in several different directions. And it became very clear that Evergreen should be on this podcast. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to Humanity. Welcome to Humanity, Evergreen. It's great to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm terrific. Thanks, Fred. I'm having I don't know, it almost feels like initiated by our meeting or around that time. It seems like there's just been a time of abundance here. Maybe it's spring. I'm looking out the window at the madrona trees that are fruiting like crazy, and yeah.
Beautiful. I'm going to take a little stab at the bio that you gave us, and we'll see what comes up from there, but I have some ideas of different directions that we can go. So here's what we have. We have Evergreen Hericks, Susan Evergreen Hericks, PhD, has an artistic and psychological approach to being human. Her day-to-day work involves supporting graduate students who are becoming healers and clinicians. An artist and a lover of beauty medicine, ceremony, and social justice, she has a varied background in academia, rites of passage work and wilderness guiding, ceremonial play and art, and sex-positive education. Evergreen has been active in her local community with numerous projects, including co-designing Ojai's annual community Mandala, which involves hundreds of painters of all ages. On a smaller scale, Evergreen loves creating original masks and painting on large cardboard. Her current passions are for sharing poetry as medicine, dreamwork practice with anyone who wants to do it, and creating a family of odd masks and costumes in which to visit her fellow humans with joy and mystery. Now, Evergreen, that's quite a bio, and it really is. We're going to touch on what we touch on, and maybe we'll really get a handle on exactly how all of this is encompassed by being you. And that's really often the first question I ask my guests. So we're going to go there again with you, and it seems like they're already prepared. It's a 9-letter, 3-word question, and it tends
Right.
to put people on their heels. And here we go. Evergreen Herricks, who are you?
Yeah. Well, I did have warning. I was listening to one of your other interviews and I thought, Fred is just a trickster. you know, what a tricky and wonderful question. And, it invites sort of what do I do answer in some ways. And of course, being as deep as you are, Fred, that's not what you're after. What you just read is some of what I do. You know, it's so hard to capture yourself, and I've been laughing thinking of dating profiles and how people either try to capture themselves accurately or often they'll really describe their glory days. They'll describe the time and the things that they did that they're proudest of, but perhaps which aren't current. So that's kind of an exercise in saying to yourself, what's really current? What's really alive in me? What's really happening? Including the mundane.
Right. Like what is really current? I mean, we
Yeah,
don't have to say what day it is because people be listening to it down in the future. But
right.
what's here right now? No kidding. Who are you this second?
Yeah, yeah. And this is our message to the future. You know, there's a few things that are just so alive for me right now. One of them is poetry. Really for the last few years, I was an English major way back in my in my college days. And somehow I'm in the road of poetry. Poetry is just always coming to me. And it's such incredible medicine, the language, the economy, and that's something that I even in my mundane world, even in my work world, it's easy to just proliferate that, to share that. So that's something. And also, dream work is really coming up big for me. Dream work is something that I've known since I was a little child that was really important just intuitively. And then I've had a lot of experience doing dream work and some facilitating of it over the years. And as we do, we kind of go in cycles and drop things. And just recently, it was really due to a friend who I was talking with about some struggles, and dreams just sort of spontaneously came up. And I think when the dreamer has a facility with their own inner world, it becomes really easy to work with it, to enter in, and it's so incredibly rich. And I think one of the things that seems so potent to me about it is that it's ever present and every single day you get a new chance. So it's not like you need to go to this workshop, you need to read this book. It's all you need to do is sleep and wake up and hopefully remember something, and you've got this treasure trove of imagery that's completely about your own current state.
Okay, that's really great. I think we have something to build on. Let's see. It may sound like this is two different things.
Hmm.
The idea that poetry and dream work are like two things of your high interest, things that are coming forth right now. But I see a deep resonance between poetry and dream work. And I guess the question, or maybe if we can go in this together, we're looking at the sort of the undercurrent, what's underneath our conscious
Hmm.
behaviors, our conscious doing, what is it. I was so curious about what your definition is of poetry, because I'm finding myself creating poetry these days, and I'm like, where does this come from? What is it that I get to say things that look and sound sort of beautiful and create music in their own right while they're coming from my soul or my heart? And I suspect that those things just sort by default become poetry.
Hmm.
But in the end, isn't, or along with that, I should say, not in the end, dreaming also has so much of those same characteristics,
Mm-hmm.
sort of underneath the surface of who I say I am, or the image I maintain, or the ego that I'm driving forth of how I present myself. There seems to be a boiling, sort of a cauldron that is prepared, if I open it up, to express itself naturally, to
Mm-hmm.
express itself openly, almost like freely, in ways that are not necessarily consistent with the three-dimensional world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
is there something there about the cross-linking between poetry and dream work?
Oh, for sure. What popped into my head was the name of a dream book called Portal to the Source, and maybe
Yeah.
it's a bit inflated, but it feels like that to me where, yeah, it's we have this source material in us. And here's the thing, and here's what fascinates me is our ego desire is kind of to have things be pretty or impressive or even interesting. But often what our psyche supplies us is weird, it's
Hmm.
strange.
Yeah.
It might be repulsive. And I recently had a friend bring me a dream and say, "This is really raunchy." And I said, "Well, that's the best kind, you know?"
Yeah.
And so I think that there's this bit of weirdness. Michael Mead talks about the original meaning of weird, which is it's about having a foot in each world, and so you can have your daily life and you have this otherworldly connection that for me I think grows as I get older. I just want to be weirder and weirder, and I'm more and more comfortable with the weirdness and the sense that I am actually tethered to this source of knowing, which is playful, it's confusing, it's full of images. It's not literal, and it asks me to get out of my head, get into my body, explore other ways of knowing that when I was young, I was like, I'm going to apply my brain to everything and figure it out. Right. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. And this, both dreaming and poetry, just bring you into an economy of image and meaning that is, like you're saying, bubbles up. It's so deep, and there's a way to work with it that is not just intellectual.
So you used the word economy a couple times already, and
Mhm.
can you help me apply it to this domain, this realm that we're speaking of, in the world of dream work or poetry? What do you mean when you're using the word economy?
Yeah, I could give you an example. What I mean is that I could say all of the things I just said, I could say paragraphs more explaining a thing. And a good poet or a good dream will just put that into an image, a few lines. Can I read you an example of a
Of
poem?
course, yes,
Yeah,
lovely. Sure.
this is something that I've been kind of spending the week with. And I think this is a great example of a poem with economy that it's just packed. The poet is Jane Hirschfield, and the title of the poem is The Weighing. The heart's reasons sing clearly. Even the hardest will carry its whip marks and sadness, and must be forgiven, as the drought starved eland forgives the drought starved lion who finally takes her, enters willingly then the life she cannot refuse, and is lion, is fed, and does not remember the other. So few grains of happiness measured against all the dark, and still the scales balance. The world asks of us only the strength we have, and we give it. Then it asks more, and we give it.
Very powerful. Very
Yeah,
well
and
read. Yeah,
thank you.
there's a tonality. When you say you've been working with that for a week, what does that mean?
Mhm.
when I'm in a museum, sometimes I'll see an extraordinary piece and I'll just look at it because, well, I should, and I'll look at it again and, well, what do I see? Well,
Right, right.
I shouldn't leave yet because this is actually an important piece. I don't know why I'm standing here, but
Yeah.
it's truly
Yeah.
interesting that then it becomes really interesting. How did this piece ever even become important? And then I get caught up
Mhm.
in sort of things that are needlessly embarrassing as if I'm under equipped to actually appreciate the piece. Okay. So with poetry, when you say you've been working on this for a week or, reread it, what is that? What is someone like
Yeah.
you who's living in dreamwork and poetry as a way of being? What does that mean to look at this powerful poem for a week?
Yeah. Maybe work is not the right word. I mean, I actually hold it quite lightly. I think I've just been carrying it around. And I read it a couple times a day, probably. And, something that happened yesterday, I was on the phone with a friend talking about some struggles. And I just said, "Hey, wait a minute. I want to read you this poem." And I'm probably the only person I know who'll read you a poem in the middle of a phone call. But so there's a little bit of feeling like this poem applies right now, applies for me.
Hmm.
There's this sense of, it starts off with hard hearts, like, and we have them, we see them, we're in conflict, we're in this non-binary place with the person over there has a hard heart and can't be forgiven. And, right out of the gate, she's saying, nobody has a hard heart that hasn't been whip marked by sadness. And it's like, whoa, if I can remember that, and then this imagery of the eland being devoured by the lion and becoming a lion, and there's something so material, you know. I sometimes feel like our current spiritual climate, for lack of a better word, is can be kind of Pollyanna, like we're having a high vibration, whatever, and I love this kind of imagery, and dreams do this too, where it's like, no, this is bloody. This is a starved animal eating another starved animal. And what can we know about this? How do we feel it in our own body about being devoured, being the devourer, and becoming something else? And does this relate back to forgiving? You know, like when you devour me and I become you, is that forgiveness? I don't know. So it's like, look at all of the words about this poem when the poem itself just does it in a flash.
Thank you with that. Looking at what's really so underneath the ego's prettiness or the ego's, interest in being impressive or interesting, and you then spoke towards the weirdness, the drawing to weirdness, having a foot in both realms. And shamanic is also another word that has a foot in both realms. And you know, the strangeness, the repulsiveness, and then, as your friend had said, the raunchiness. There's like a taboo
Mhm.
in letting things unfurl,
Mhm.
like in accepting and embracing the rawness of
Mhm.
devouring, of power, of sex. It's impossible to, I just find myself, well, we're going to sex here,
Mhm. Mhm.
like sex shows up in this
Mhm.
conversation. And I wonder, in your bio, you speak a bit to sex positive education, but there's more to what you speak here, including,
Mhm.
I don't know, even like the original masks or the rite of passage work, the lover of beauty medicine. there's like a deep sensuality or sexuality in the unfurling or uncovering of the rawness of our humanity. And,
Mhm.
I become you when you devour me inside of
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
You're free to say whatever you want here. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
Oh, yes. As I was thinking about our talk, I thought, what do I really want to talk about? And I think my three were poetry, dreams, and sex.
There you go. Well, I
So,
didn't know that, folks. And
yeah.
I picked that up out of the
So
air, but
we
I
just
got
found
it.
our way there. Absolutely. I wish so intensely that all of us could just talk about sex more easily, and just as a lay person and a peer, I've just seen so many people, witnessed so many people, we all have wounds in our sexuality, and that have to do with our embodiedness and shame and all of that. And we just, especially, I think it might be American. I don't have enough travel behind me to say, but I feel like Americans are particularly puritanical, and we just we can't find our way there often. And I just imagine if we could sit and talk about sex the way we talk about the excellent meal we had the other day, you know, and I tend to do this with my friends, and they just know it's what they're going to get with me. And
Hmm.
what's been so wonderful is that as a result, I'll find that talking with people, and I'll see that little moment of, oh, that's a sexual thing, and I maybe shouldn't talk about it. And then they'll turn around and they'll say, oh, well, I can tell you this. And I have so much gratitude for that because it's part of who we are and it's part of what we're working on and it's part of our joy, hopefully.
Right. It's not just a part of who we are either. It's like, many would say it's the central space of who we are. It's actually all of who we are in so many ways, and, or at
Yeah.
least source of all of who we are.
Hmm.
I hear what you're saying about American puritanical,
Yes. Did I lose you?
puritanical, or the Puritan
Yeah.
in American. And,
Hmm.
I think I don't know the history well enough, but it does seem like the making of America and the Puritan go back to around the same era. And I'm on shaky ground here, so I'll kind of ease away. But you mentioned earlier sort of our Pollyanna spiritual climate. And there is at least a resonance, if not a synonym, with this puritanical and Pollyanna. And sort of this taboo to speak towards raw sexuality that would
Hmm.
be counter to puritanical or Pollyanna ways of being, right? Like that's the opposite. If we were to
Hmm.
open up and start talking just freely about everything sexual now,
Hmm.
one could no longer apply the words puritanical or Pollyanna to our conversation.
Hmm.
It's that easy, right? You want to blow up Puritan, start talking straight about sex.
Right.
And we're on that edge that it's really similar to the edge of this doing, my image, my being impressive or being pretty, or being what, handsome or gorgeous, like who I present myself or who I attempt to present myself as, all that doing here in a three-dimensional world. And then the interface that then leads to dream work and poetry, right? Then there's a sort of
Hmm.
underground current. It
Hmm.
seems like in here we have another one of those where there's a puritanical, Pollyannish, maybe American based things that we can talk about. And as soon as the rustling of sexuality shows up or the boiling over of sexuality shows up, there's a zone to cross over in order to get to the underground raw current, which might include then
Hmm.
sexuality.
Hmm.
Like there's sexuality sits underneath, and you have to have special permission or special realms in order
Hmm.
to speak openly. So your friends speak openly to you about that because that's who they know you as, and they know that you can embrace and listen and interchange with them.
Hmm.
Let's see if we can interface this, that you kind
Hmm.
of like living in both realms, right? That's
Hmm.
what weirdness is, that you're striving for weirdness, And it looks like I might have just outlined where when you're living with one foot in one realm and one foot in the other, these are the lines that you're drawing.
Mhm.
The line, right? The line between what you do and show on the outside, who you pretend to be, and the line then, and then underneath that line, who you really are. The things, which includes many
Mhm.
things that you're not open to and free to speak about or converse with others.
Mhm. Mhm.
Your thoughts about that? Anything there?
Yeah. I love trying to bring this all together. You know, maybe maybe we live superficially a lot of the time. And also maybe we are what we pretend to be, you know?
Oh, that's true too, right?
So, let me try this. One of the ways that I bridge all of this is with ceremonial work. And this brings in my experience with rites of passage work. And it has to do with this way of knowing that we're talking about that goes very deep. It goes very deep into image and language and dream and desire, and the language, the doing kind of maybe escapes us sometimes. And I think that we need to, as Resma Menachem says, what we need to build a culture and we need to create ritual as ceremony. We need to create around how do we bring these pieces together. And I'm not a religious person in literal terms and church going terms, but we've lost a lot of that ritualistic knowledge in our culture. So how do we start recognizing image? How do we incorporate it? How do we look at the body and how actually the body is the site of oppression and repression, you know? And ceremonies give us an in, and they can be very simple. They have a beginning, they have a middle, they have an end. You know, ceremonies that we're familiar with might be a wedding, right? You have
Hmm.
you come down the aisle, you take a vow, you have a party, you know. And sometimes the vow part is not a vow, it's a burying, it's a funeral. It's I'm done with this. This is now behind me.
You
Or
mean
I will.
like I'm no longer unwed? Is that what you're saying?
Mhm. No, no, like if you I guess we're all familiar with funerals and weddings at least,
Yeah.
and I think life is cyclical, and one of the things that we can really rely on is the cyclical aspect of life. We're going to have spring, we're going to have winter, we're going to have fall, we're going to have summer, not in that order. But this is the wisdom behind things like the I Ching, which you're familiar with. There's always going to be a rising and a falling. There's always going to be a birth and a death. And can we start to befriend the way that we die repeatedly in our lives and what that looks like? And the more you become friends with the fact that I might die and I'm going to die, then you can maybe make friends with the fact that you're going to go through to something else. And ceremonially is part of how we can enact that and recognize that. So a rite of passage is that it's saying, I'm dying to being a child. I'm now going to move into being an adult. And
Yes.
that's a new thing.
Wow. Okay. So the cyclical nature of this experience, it almost seems like life is a subset of the cyclical nature of all of existence. Life is just one of the many because if death is not life, then life is simply a piece of that cycle. It's not really the cyclical nature of life, it's a cyclical
Hmm.
nature of all of it, which includes life
Hmm.
going to death, going to life,
Right,
etc.
right. In life, we are in death, the
Exactly.
Christian liturgy says. So we put so much energy into resisting death, right?
We
I mean, look at us
hello.
now. Look at
Yeah,
us
hello,
resisting death.
hello, indeed. Yeah.
And
We'll
so
kill ourselves to prevent dying, actually. That will
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So obviously I'm talking about a symbolic approach, but even then, even more literally, you know, when do we talk about suicide? When do we say, I could really just be done? You know, where do we make space for that conversation and being honest about, you know, can we be honest about sex? Could we be honest about the fact that I just don't find this worthwhile and I'm ready to be done
Right.
and not have to be shut down around that and just be honest around that. So,
There seems to be a bravery or at least a courage. We keep throwing out these terms, and I would every time, and both of us are doing this right now, which is we use these large terms, and I'd love to. We
mhm,
use them, and then we want to. Here as I do. I use a word, and then I want to look it
mhm,
up to find out what I just said. It's just
right.
hilarious, right? I
Yeah,
say something, I'm like, I think this is the right word. Let's just run with it. And I don't look it up to see if it was the right word. I look it up to see what is it that I just said that I have to now own. So,
right.
in the word of courage or bravery, I find you and this approach extraordinarily sexy and interesting. And I want to follow you. I want to be like, yeah, let's go look. Let's look underneath this rock. Let's look
Right.
underneath this piece here, or let's look inside here where no one has looked, or let's look over like secret almost,
Uh-huh.
like we have maybe earned the right to look together at the concept of death, at the concept or the concept of sex, or the concept or even of suicide, or we start looking at things that otherwise just do not get talked freely about for fear of how people might respond puritanically, Pollyanishly, and
Mhm.
take me out of my misery, like hurt me or
Mhm.
disgrace me for having any interest or even speaking the truth about these things. Like there is for me something like getting the cyclical nature of it, the inevitability of death, and the cyclical nature of all of it, and the reduced fear of at least the reduced fear of death as being the ultimate bad outcome, and even a reduction of declaring things as good and bad, but wanting to see it all or experience it all, which includes the areas that have been hidden, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
dreams and poetry and sex and death and suicide and rites of passage, unbridled, raunchy weirdness, having a foot in both worlds. This seems to serve that purpose. And then, really, for
Mhm.
me, from like Kishkas, if you will, I am super curious as to looking around the corner at the things that have been hidden from.
Yes. Yeah, I love this takes me back to dream where we so often we dream about being threatened, right? Where we're threatened with death, but it's the ego death. And when you're looking at a dream, whoever I am in the dream, that's my dream ego. That's my ego position. And so if I am being pursued and being threatened and I'm afraid and I'm going to be killed, you know, this is daily opportunity to really feel that. And what literal minded approach to dream does is say, oh, I really need to get away from my threatening neighbor, in the dream or whatever it might be. But the wisdom that we get about this is that, okay, it's actually the dream ego, it's my ego that feels this existential threat. And the question is, how can I actually take this monster, take this threatening person, and somehow, maybe over time, sit down and have tea with them and go, what are you all about? And what is it that you're trying to kill? And it's probably the case that that thing ought to die. Maybe it's my pride. Maybe it's my shame. If I get caught doing this sexual thing, I'll be rejected by everyone in my world. If anyone knew that I desired that thing, it would be the end. And so it's like, well, maybe that end would be a good end. you know, maybe you would remake yourself into who you really are on the other side of that. I don't know. I mean, there's just so many problems with defining ourselves, right? And then how do we actually just let go of those definitions that are repressing us?
The notion, again, your bravery is extraordinary, and you probably don't feel it as such, but it's like, again, it's very compelling, and I want to stand right up next to you. And there's like, oh, what if, this idea, the murderer, the threatener, the one who's taking aim at my ego to just annihilate it, to kill it. And you're
Mhm.
like, okay, let's have tea and find out what you're up to. Let's just,
Yes.
and because what you're up to is probably worth being up to. It's probably, you probably got a good point here, that this is time to murder this ego death. Like, go for
Mhm.
it. I just want
Mhm.
to kind of get a clue of what are you up to? Like, what makes that interesting? It's sort of like there's something elandish. There's something
Yes.
elandish
Yes.
about
It's
that
the elanding,
conversation.
yeah. Yeah, here's the other thing though. If I were to take a dream where something's threatening me, threatening to kill me, and I wanted to play with that and work with that, it's going to depend on me and what's going on. But one of the things you might bring to that is actually boundary setting, just like you would with real life. You would say, "Huh, threatening scary monster, you know, I'm willing to talk to you. My heart is pounding, I'm sweating. Really want to be in flight. But scary monster, you can't violate my boundaries in this and this way. Can we still talk? You know? So, what I love about dreaming is it's like real life, and it's like, but you always get another chance. Maybe in real life, we always get another chance too. But there's an autonomy to dream figures, even as they are part of our own psyche. So, the more you get into the working, it's like the playing, it's kind of like playing with your own multiple personalities. Here's the monster of me, here's the table of me, here's
Hmm.
the madrona tree of me. And
Hmm.
so you get to kind of experience, God, the fullness of yourself, the many, many aspects of yourself, and including those reviled aspects.
So the spaces that I still want to tie in, because I think we're doing a great job of creating this, how they create like baseballs and tennis balls, a string, string,
Uh-huh.
string, string. I think we're doing it. I think we're doing, I love what we're doing here, actually, Evergreen.
Yeah.
There's actually three spaces that I want to get into here. And I think these are the next spaces, which is, you know, in again, when in your description of yourself, you speak to a few different things: the porting healers, upcoming healers and clinicians. Already know about sort of your deep love for, or your deep interest, anyways, for theology and
Hmm.
depth psychology and Jungian psychology in particular, and then going deeply into the wilderness. Which, if I remember correctly, is that where you met Alex the first time? Was that with Tom Brown, or where was it that you met
No,
Alex?
Alexander and I met through Joanna Macy.
Oh, that's right. Okay, cool.
Hmm.
Yeah. And there's like and then this, sort of the trickster nature of masks and painting on cardboard and
Hmm.
um, you know, and costumes. There's something here. First, I guess, how did you pick up the name Evergreen? When did that happen?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Short story is that I started doing rites of passage work about 15 years ago. And my first trip, my first vision quest, as you might call it, was with Bill Plotkin of Animas Valley Institute. And I never, ever thought I would have a name like Evergreen. I felt a little dismissive and scornful of people with names like that. And, it's just part of that practice, that phenomenon, is sometimes this happens. And so, really, on my first vision fast, I, much to my surprise, was given the name Evergreen. And it's a bit challenging to try on a new name. My given name is Susan. And a couple years later, I moved to Ojai, and it was an opportunity to use it. And so I've always been Evergreen in Ojai, which fits Ojai. But it took probably about 4 years for it to really feel like me. And it's interesting. I find that people react differently than they used to. Like in the beginning, people would say, "That's not really your name," and I'd be like, good grief. And now that doesn't happen to me. People will say, "Oh my goodness, where does that name come from?" But it's kind of it has an upside. Evergreen to me is a bit naive, you know.
Doesn't it count? It's kind of counter to the cycle. There's something about remaining
Yeah.
green through all the four seasons
Oh,
that you named
yeah.
in order.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
fights the cycle. It's like, oh yeah, this tree here, it's the same for all seasons.
And you know why? It's because of their sugar.
Say
Which
more
is
about
funny
that.
to me. Yeah, well, when you're looking at an evergreen tree, they have needles, which are a type of leaf, but it's something about the sugar content of the plant that keeps it from drying out and, falling off, like deciduous trees do.
Wow, that's
So,
awesome.
yeah, but I wish to me, I actually feel sometimes like I'm not resilient in the way I would like to be. And I kind of look at evergreen and I go, wow, that seems like resilient, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So I guess I'm still exploring what that name is for me.
It sort of sounds like it's shielded against, for me, Evergreen, when I first ran into it, I suppose I loved it. I thought it was so cool, like so cool. When I was 5 or 6 or 7, when I got my first taste of, it's so well named and it's so cool that it beats to a different drummer. And I loved my Evergreens, and it's easy
Hmm.
to say,
Hmm.
is shielded from or at least pretends in its outward presentation to be shielded from the death and dying component. I mean, not that you can't kill an evergreen, but it's sort of like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
here whether we like it or not. Even in the world of technology, when I create an evergreen webinar, it's one that I don't even have to be at. It's just going to keep going and going long after
Hmm.
I'm even not
Hmm.
here anymore. It's like forever evergreen,
Hmm.
which is counterintuitive to this cyclical nature of this existence that we've been pointing to in this
Yeah.
conversation.
Hmm.
Like you get a viewpoint. It's almost like naming yourself that allows you to dig into both realms or to all realms,
Hmm. Hmm.
because we can count on you to be steady. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, thanks for that insight. I haven't really, had that before. And, the name was given to me.
Right.
And it's kind of like, it's funny what you're saying because I'm like, oh no, I've definitely died a bunch of times,
Right. Right.
So I know what that's like.
No, but it's
So,
it's you know what I'm saying here, let me try again because
yes.
it's not, it's sort of like you get to hover over the top. That's the evergreen you are. Yes, you get to watch and be with yourself, living, dying. And as evergreen, you're sort of the dream weaver. You're sort of the master, the crown master, the one who gets to be the one knowing that you're living and dying. There's a third person there. There's the living,
Hmm.
there's the dying, and the one who's
Hmm.
describing it. And you get to be the describer, perhaps, the evergreen.
Oh, I love that, Fred. Part of what is alive for me right now is related to this. And less than a year ago, I did a really big ceremony, and it was something I hadn't had the courage to do before. And it came out of kind of hitting a wall with my creative work, or just, I guess, my creative work, and having this big yes to knowing what it is, what my being is about, which is to serve beauty, and then constantly coming up against this no. Well, I'm going to watch a movie, we all have it, but I kind of just came to a point where I just said, God, I'm so sick of this. And my guide, Annie Bloom, who's just amazing, She said, Evergreen, I've never heard you say this before. What you would do is do a ceremony.
Hmm.
And in the past, that prospect had really terrified me. And I had been so honored to witness many ceremonies of others. It always just sort of terrified me.
Hmm.
And I finally just went, yeah, I'm doing that ceremony.
Hmm.
And Annie kept, in her wisdom, she kept giving me an out. She'd say, you don't really have to do that ceremony if you don't want to. And I was like, no, I'm there, Annie. I'm
Hmm.
doing that ceremony.
Hmm.
And I did. And there was a commitment, a vow to serving beauty, which is pretty abstract, right? Like, what does that even mean? But this is my being. So I'm just in a new cycle of like, what is that about?
Hmm.
And finding the yes and managing the no. And some of it's just habits. Some of it's so mundane. It's just habits. You've
Hmm.
got to have practices where you choose the thing that actually brings you alive. And sometimes you don't, and that's okay too.
Right. Sometimes it's just time to watch a movie, sometimes,
Exactly.
or eat a bag of popcorn or whatever like that. Yep. How can we move this into, let's talk a little bit about the mandala, because I
Mhm.
think there's, that may be the last cover of the baseball that we're creating here is your work
Yeah.
with annual community mandala. It sounds extraordinary. I really know very little of it. So maybe you can clue in our listeners and myself as to
Uh-huh.
what that is for you at this time.
Yeah, I'd love to. In Ojai, we have a local festival in October every year, and it's a ordinary festival that you've been to where there are pop-ups selling jewelry and lemonade, and you know and then all of the local nonprofits come out, and it's like that. But about close to 30 years ago, a bunch of the many artists in Ojai got together and they did what at the time was like a guerrilla art project. And they painted about a 50-foot mandala in the main intersection of town. It's a small town. So
Yeah.
in the middle of the night, they were able to do that. And so then it actually became part of the festival. And we've been doing this every year except for last October with a caveat there too. And I became involved with this about 10 years ago. And River Sauvageau has been doing this since the beginning for almost 30 years. And she is also a Native American church person. So we share this sort of ceremonial background, but it's just in the fabric of it. We don't talk about it. There's a member of our team, Mary Kennedy, and we do a big design that kind of is the framework of what's going to happen. And then we bring in, for big areas, some more skilled artists from the community. And then anyone and everyone comes, and we have like patterned areas and a border and things that are good for kids. So we just do it with everyone. And normally this happens starting at about 8 or 9 in the evening. And we paint till roughly 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. And then it lives really just the next day. And by the next night, Caltrans comes in and they wash it off. So it's an incredible experience of impermanence that's just wonderful. This year we did it in the park because we didn't have the festival and we spent longer doing it. And then it actually stayed for a while, which was odd to me. It was gone. In my mind, it was gone, but it was still there.
Hmm.
So it's just,
Like evergreen, like that.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's just a really powerful way to play. It's one of those things where you have this containment, ceremonial in that aspect. You've got to have containment, you've got to have a structure because you're inviting in a ton of chaos, in the form of humans, with paintbrushes. And, then there's this fantastic, intense period of painting in the dark, and everything is shining, everything is wet, everything is just coming through from, we don't know what it's going to be. And then you get one day of sunshine on this creation, and then it's gone again.
Brilliant. And it
Mhm.
really does point to, I could delineate, but in some ways it would be condescending to get to how
Mhm.
that mandala actually points to our several, if not all, the pieces of where this discussion has gone for this last near hour.
Yeah, yeah.
Really including all the cyclical nature and all the beauty, all the underground, all the coming through us, all the sexuality, all the
Mhm.
exploration, all the
Mhm.
raw nature of humanity, the patterns, the weirdnesses, even even our ego interests and
Yep, yep.
everything is really entailed in that day. What's really interesting, Evergreen, is when you speak to this last year where without a festival it lasted longer, and that was almost disturbing to you. Is that what I'm hearing? It was almost like, well,
Yeah.
wait, this is supposed to be gone a day later.
Yeah. It wasn't disturbing. I found that in my own mind, we came, we actually painted this year, we painted like a Monday through Thursday. It was actually too long, but that's another story. It was wonderful, but we had to do it for the spacing, and it was actually quite gigantic. It's in Libby Park in Ojai around the fountain.
Wow.
And that next weekend, River and I kind of came. She actually set up an altar by the fountain. We just sort of held space and talked to people. And jugglers came, and children were playing at the playground there, and it was just incredible. And then, really, after that, I forgot about it. But it remained, and it's gone now. Finally, kind of got rained off and washed off. But for me individually as an artist, it's really helped me really love and lean into the impermanence of creating things. And when I say I like to paint on cardboard, I mean, it's true. I like to work big. And I also, I don't want to pay a couple $100 for a big canvas. I'm just not going to do it. So, but I'm completely at home with that.
Mm.
And, if you want to buy my cardboard painting, it's going to disintegrate in about 30 years probably, but everything does.
Everything does.
So I
Mhm.
I just love it. I
That's
love it.
beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Freaking totally awesome. Okay, so we will put your post in, by the way. And so listeners who are listening now will already have had access to the short video about the mandala that
Thanks.
we'll put that in the front edge. So, Evergreen, how can people, if they want to get in touch with you, or if they want to walk with you, if they want to draw with you, if they want to study with you, I could get pretty raunchy here. I'm just going to bypass that one.
You can
How
do
can
dreamwork.
people actually reach out to you?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't have a website. What
That's
what do we
awesome
do?
too, by the way. I love that.
I'm happy to provide an email.
Hmm.
I'm not afraid of that. And
Okay,
also, people could find me on Facebook, and it's Susan Evergreen Herricks. And people could contact me through there too, and also look at pictures and things like that.
that's awesome. That's beautiful. All right. Well, great. Is there anything, you're like, as we now head towards tapering this conversation, is
Hmm.
there anything, any insight or any kind of, discovery, or is any kind of maybe call to action or anything you want to bring forth? Anything. It doesn't have to be yes, by the way,
Hmm.
for the listeners or me or us or
Hmm.
anyone.
Oh, wow. Fred, this has just been so wonderful.
Thank you.
I think what I want to do is read another poem. Is that okay?
Yes, that's beautiful. I love it. Oh, it's so great. Better than
This
choreographed. Absolutely
This poem,
fantastic.
the poet is Padraig Otuma. He has a wonderful podcast called Poetry Unbound. He's Irish, so when he reads his own poetry, it's just fantastic. This is called The Facts of Life.
Mm,
Facts of life, that you were born and you will die, that you will sometimes love enough and sometimes not, that you will lie if only to yourself, that you will get tired, that you will learn most from the situations you did not choose, that there will be some things that move you more than you can say, that you will live, that you must be loved, that you will avoid questions most urgently in need of your attention, that you began as the fusion of a sperm and an egg of two people who once were strangers and may well still be, that life isn't fair, that life is sometimes good and sometimes better than good, that life is often not so good, that life is real. And if you can survive it well with love and art and meaning given where meaning's scarce. That you will learn to live with regret, that you will learn to live with respect, that the structures that constrict you may not be permanently constraining, that you will probably be okay, that you must accept change before you die, but you will die anyway. So you might as well live and you might as well love. You might as well love. You might as well love.
Thank you,
Thank
Susan
you,
Evergreen
Fred.
Hericks. It's really been wonderful. It's been really great to learn more about you. It's been great to have such a beautiful conversation. And I welcome our future contacts. It looks like we'll probably be having them for the rest of our lives. So I'm
Yes, I
very
hope
eager.
so. Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome. And listeners, thank you for being with us today. It's really been an honor. This whole technology is beautiful and allows for these discovery, explorative inquiries into what makes people tick. And with deep honor, we really got to explore what makes Susan Evergreen Herricks tick, and it's just been a pleasure. So thanks for being here, all of you. Rock on, take on the world the way you do, and such is life. And as this last poem comes, whatever space you're in, I bet you match up to one of the things that came out of that poem. And there is a cyclical nature to it all. And really, in the end, just straight up, welcome to humanity. And thanks for being here, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week, a great rest of your life. Take care. See you on the backside. Bye for now.
Hey, welcome to Humanity Family. It's Ryan Levesque here, co-producer of the show. I truly hope you enjoyed Dr. Fred's in-depth conversation today. If you did, and if the conversations we share each week are making a difference for you, could you please take just a moment to leave a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts? Your enthusiastic review helps new listeners discover the show. Your support here really does make a difference. I'd also like to invite you to reach out to a friend or two who would appreciate today's episode. Maybe shoot them a quick text or email, or maybe pick up the phone and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast so they can be enriched from the discovery of amazing ideas and insights each week. As always, you can find past episodes along with the complete show notes and links at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. If you'd like to explore how working one-on-one with Dr. Fred can help you break through whatever challenges you might be facing with your mental health or well-being, leading to new levels of freedom and vitality, I invite you to reach out to us directly by emailing Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. That's DRFRED at welcometohumanity.net. Thanks so much for listening, and keep an ear out for another captivating conversation next week. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and indeed, a beautiful life. Welcome to humanity.